Hi, I'm Jonathan. I'm in our Dumbo Brooklyn showroom. That's the showroom for and studio for OMA and Fleetwood Sound. And today's On Listening piece is Spotify, the death of sound and music, which I admit sounds a bit hyperbolic, but there's a reality to this which I think is extremely important to communicate. And I'd like to offer you a guarantee, which I've never done before. And that is, if you actually watch this video all the way through and listen carefully, that by the end, if you are a Spotify user, you will have the opportunity to improve your life significantly, your health and well-being, at either no cost or a very, very marginal cost. And I can't imagine anything else you'd watch that's 10, 15 minutes long that can promise that, but I really do believe it. So let's get started. And I want to start in a not talking about Spotify, but my friend Emma, who runs what has been rated by the Guinness Book of World Records at times as the quietest place in the world. Emma runs the anechoic chamber at Orfield Laboratories in Minneapolis, Minnesota. What is an anechoic chamber? It's a very, very carefully designed and engineered room that absorbs all sound. It has these fiberglass wedges that are nearly 1 meter deep, and all sound goes into these wedges and gets caught in there and then dies. And so in this room, you can not only hear your bloodstream and your heart pumping blood, you can also hear your central nervous system operating. It sounds kind of like a high-pitched whine. I've been in these rooms, not in Emma's. And this room has gotten a lot of press recently because it's rented out for people to experience an hour, for example, of absolute silence. Again, this is the quietest, technically, place on the entire planet. Very special. And Emma sometimes sends me the titles of pieces in the popular press that particularly irk her, and I understand why. For example, Popular Mechanics. They built the quietest room in the world. Why is everyone so afraid to step inside it? Got that? Maybe even better. This is the New York Times. Everything fit to print. The Sunday Read. Could I survive the quietest place on earth? Well, I understand Emma's reaction to that crap. I have to say that I've never read anything in popular press, mainstream press, magazines, newspapers. I'm dealing with like the top people at the Washington Post, New York Times, Harper's, the ex-music critic for the New Yorker. Nothing ever gets published on sound that's really worthwhile reading. But Emma doesn't like this, but I understand exactly why those titles were written. First, to grab attention, because everything is about getting your attention now. But they talk about a fear, right? And what that fear is has everything to do with what we're going to talk about, which is Spotify. Now, I'll admit that my own experience with Spotify is extremely limited. I've never been a Spotify user. And obviously, with Oswald's Mill Audio and Fleetwood Sound, we're making what many people consider to be the world's best audio equipment. Best sounding, best looking, most beautifully made. And so that's all about the sound quality, right? Spotify is not about sound quality. Spotify is about delivering the most music to the most people. And when people would come in here and ask me, can I listen to Bluetooth and Spotify through these, I'm like, why would you want to do that? This stuff costs a fortune. And why would you want to like bring McDonald's to a Michelin 3-star restaurant, or I don't know, some other kind of trite example? However, I ran into a problem several years ago when we first got the Fleetwood Sound Excelsior speaker, which is this thing back here. When we first brought this in here, this is a speaker that has Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, you can play a turntable through it, analog, digital inputs. And the easiest way to get people to understand it was to allow them to use Bluetooth. And I have to admit, the thing sounds amazing with Bluetooth. I use Tidal, which is a high-res streaming service. There's also the French one, Qobuz. And I always knew that Spotify was the low-res service with the worst sound. But what would happen was very interesting, because I'd say to people, just connect to the thing with Bluetooth, it took 10 seconds, and play whatever you want. And they would do this, and the sound would come out, and it would either sound great or it would sound terrible. And when it would sound terrible, I knew exactly why it sounded terrible. It sounded terrible because they were using Spotify. And I'd say, hey, are you using Spotify? And invariably, the answer is yes. I had like 1,000% success rate on this. And so I would then try to show them, by playing the same song on Tidal, Qobuz, how it could really sound. And people would be like amazed. But then I would try to explain to them that this is not just about, oh, it should sound better, but this is not good for you. Spotify is providing music sound in a way that's not good for your brain. Now, this is very, very hard for people to understand, and so I was trying to think of a good way to graphically, show this. This is a package of Doritos. Just bought this at the store. I can't believe how expensive this shit is. I don't, consume junk food. I cook. I did make a little prick in the bag so it wouldn't blow out. But, this bag of Doritos, it's junk food, right? Everyone knows that junk food isn't good for you, but people say, well, I like having a little snack. I don't eat it that often. It's not that, they have all sorts of reasons. But that bag, this is what it amounts to, right? Not much. And, this is all chemicals. This is a technical product. An enormous amount of technology went into making this shit, making it addictive, making you want to buy this and consume this, and whether it's good for you or not, whether you're willing to eat things that are bad for you. And we know that if you eat junk food and that's all you eat, you're going to get sick, because it's not what your body needs. Sound is actually very similar to food. We consume it, and if we consume poor quality sound and music, we don't get what we need out of the sound and the music. What we get is something which I'm going to go into here, which is it's a little difficult, because if you've only been consuming this, for your whole life, it could be a bit of a shock to find out that Spotify is not good for you. So how could that be? Well, Spotify is delivering music to you via the MP3 format, which is a compression algorithm. It's about a 16-to-1 algorithm. That means that there's only 4% of the music actually in the file that you're receiving. So you may say, well, like, so what? What does that even mean? Imagine an old school television set, right? And on the screen, there's only 4% of the pixels that are lit up. You wouldn't watch that for very long, would you? You'd be like, I don't even know what the hell's on this screen. Just turn this off. I don't care. But that's exactly what's happening with the way Spotify is delivering music to you with the MP3 format. You're only getting 4% of the actual music. So the other 96% is gone. And how is it that you could possibly want to listen to that? Well, first of all, no one actually listens to Spotify. I'll get to that in a moment. People are using it to have sound in the background to accompany all the functions and tasks and things they do during the day, and it turns out at night. People use Spotify apparently to go to sleep, which is super disturbing. So the way in which the MP3 works is it actually makes your brain fix the bad sound, fix the missing sound. Because it turns out our brains and our ears are incredibly good at restoring, repairing sound that's missing, that's sort of broken, to tell us what's going on in the world. And the academics at the Fraunhofer Institute, who invented the MP3 years ago, they knew this, and they took out the information from music bit by bit until it just all collapsed. And then they put a little bit back in again and said, here we go, here's the MP3. Spotify, which was founded by two Swedish gentlemen about 15 years ago, was not invented as a music delivery app or platform. These guys were looking for ways to sell advertising on the new internet. And they found that, they thought, and they were correct, that music would be the absolute best ways to do this. But then they had a problem because they didn't own the rights to the music, and they needed content, but they didn't care about the content. What they cared about is how much money they could make in advertising by riding that on top of musical content. I found all this out because some friends of mine who are actually mastering engineers, Josh Bonatti of Bonatti Mastering and Heba Kadri, we were having dinner a few months ago, and they said, you know, if you haven't read this, you need to read this, because this will give you all the information you need to understand what's actually happening in the landscape, in the ecosystem of music delivery. And even though, you know, OMA and Fleetwood Sound are kind of at the top of that food chain, where, why is Spotify important for me to understand what's happening with this company? I have to say that this was a very, very important read for me. This was probably the most painful, difficult book that I've read, well, certainly in many, many years. This is a book that actually had me nauseous, made me want to puke many, many times reading it. Because what's in here explains an awful lot about why my business is the way it is today, why music sounds the way it does, why the industry is structured the way it is, and why no one's listening anymore. The important part of this video, this is in the On Listening series, is why people are no longer listening. And the reason is both very complex, but it's also very, very simple. For one thing, that Spotify does not provide music in a way that's worth listening any more than this shit is actually worth eating. Yeah, I can put that in my mouth and I can eat it. And I can listen to Spotify. I'm not going to throw up. I'm not going to die. But if this is all, Spotify is all that you're doing with listening, and I find this is the case with very, very wealthy people, as well as just people of normal means. We're all now in this ultra impoverished world where sound is everywhere and no one is listening to it. For example, I drove back to the city last night. I stopped at the gas station in Pennsylvania, and sure enough, I went to get gas, and out of the pump, music is playing out of these tiny little slits. Last week, I got into the toilet on the Delta flight, coming back from Nashville, and there's this sound coming out of the speaker in the toilet, plane still on the ground. And, it's music. I don't know what the fuck it was. Some kind of music. Certainly not something I wanted to listen to. Didn't listen to it, but I heard it just like I heard the music when I got back to my seat. It was playing before takeoff. Somebody thinks that this is good for us. Somebody thinks that this is what we want. But we don't want it. And it begs the question, what is music at this point? Because that level of sound quality is so poor that really it's the shadow of music. It's not music. It's actually better described as noise, in the sense of signal to noise ratio. What does that mean? In audio engineering, we talk about signal to noise ratios. That means signal is what you want to hear, and noise is what you don't want to hear. Digital was created in part because the engineering world felt that there was too much noise in analog recording, and that with digital, all that noise could be removed. The ironic thing now is that now we're in a world where that same engineering sort of mentality has allowed us to deliver sound and music everywhere all the time. And the question is, why would anyone want that? And here is where the book and Emma collide. Because in this book, the author does an extremely good job of explaining how Spotify went about becoming the dominant delivery system in the world today for music. It's so much bigger than everything else, it's not even funny. The way it did it was by maximizing their profits and minimizing the earnings of artists. But worse, it did it by dumbing down music, by creating a playlist economy whereby the most innocuous, denatured music and sound became the most popular and the most dominant. And the reason that that could ever happen is really simple. It's because people are not using Spotify to listen to music. They're using Spotify to regulate their nervous system, up and down, for this or that activity. Sleep turns out to be a big one. Like the idea that you're using, let's call it music, sound, to help you sleep, to regulate sleep, which is a central nervous system function. It's a function of your mind. And the scary part of this is that the reason that this sound and music is now showing up all the time everywhere has nothing to do with what music can do for you, which is to connect you to the larger world, to connect you to other people, to connect you to the artist. In this book, there's constant reminders of how Spotify went to great lengths to disconnect people from music as art. In fact, Spotify created fake artists and fake music because it was a lot cheaper than paying real artists for real music. Here's a couple quotes from the book. And this is a Spotify employee talking to the author. They're not providing music. They're filling people's time. And he said at a company meeting, I remember he was like, Apple Music, Amazon, these aren't our competitors. Our only competitor is silence. And finally, quote, I definitely think people are afraid of silence. Okay. Now you start to see why those mainstream journalists were putting titles like, could I survive being in a room of absolute silence for 1 hour? Why are people afraid of stepping into this room? Music, sound, is now being used on a global scale as a narcotic to anesthetize people, which is super ironic because what music in a real sense, like high quality with real content, it does the opposite. Music makes you feel. It takes you out of yourself. People are afraid of silence because they're afraid of their own thoughts. And so we have services like Spotify that provide, I had a client just a couple of days ago explain that for him, before, sound was, this is the word he used, filler. Filling what? The space between things that you can't be silent and with yourself and with what's happening, being present to reality. No, you have to have filler. You have to have this constant sound, which is music that you're not even aware of. You don't even know what it is. So that you don't have to find out what your own thinking is. That obviously is a problem, for what I do. You might say, well, Jonathan, look, you do this and there's that. It doesn't work that way. Because subconsciously or unconsciously, everyone's being affected by this. And what the whole culture is sort of steeped in at this point is the understanding that sound and music only really exist for this purpose, and that music isn't actually something that people even know what listening is. It's a completely different thing. Hearing music is one thing, listening to it is another. And you might say, well, what about concerts? Concerts are not about music. Sound quality in concerts is unbelievably awful. They're incredibly loud. And they're exciting. You have crowds, your band, you identify with all that. It's not about the sound of the music. It's about other stuff under that guise. So if you understand this, what you can do is at least change to a streaming service. For example, Tidal Akoba, as I've been told by someone at Amazon who's high up there, that Amazon Prime delivers high-res music. It doesn't matter. What you want is music in a format that your brain is not having to continuously reconstruct at 20,000 times a second. So when I said that it's not good for your brain, just like this isn't good for your body. Why is it not good for your body? Because there's nothing in here. Besides the fact that what was in here is just all air, what is in here, this shit, when you eat it, it's just synthetic nothing. There's no substance, there's no sustenance, there's no nutrition in that. And when you consume sound, the MP3s, your brain is having to do all the work to actually make it into something that you recognize as music. I mean, we don't understand, but what comes out of these speakers, for example, still has to be processed by your brain, and then you hear music. It's not like the music is actually, this gets into a very deep, almost metaphysical conversation, which will be for another listening video, but we make the music in our heads from the sound that comes through our ears into our brains. In the case of Spotify, you're having to turn the bag of nacho Doritos into the meal that you think that you want. The alternative is simply eat real food. Don't eat junk food. Listen to at least a real streaming service that gives you high quality files. When I've had people come back to me, many, many people who I've turned on to this reality about Spotify, they come back to me and say, you know what? After what you told me, I got rid of Spotify and I started listening to X service. And he said everything, and they tell me everything changed. Their appreciation, their enjoyment of music, how it felt to them, what happened inside their bodies, all got a lot better. So there you go. That one was free. All you had to do was listen to this and understand it.